Welcome to the second season of Can I Get a Retake, the podcast where education gets innovative. I'm Michelle.
And I'm Michaela. Join us each month as we dive into the trends and technologies shaping the future of higher education.
Stay curious, stay inspired, and come learn with us from today's educators. How do the varied faiths, beliefs, and cultures in this world interface with diet and healthcare? Today's distinguished guest, Zach Cordell, is going to walk us through this web of connections. A registered dietitian, public speaker, frequent podcast guest, and former podcast host, Zach is an assistant teaching professor in the College of Health Solutions at Arizona State University.
He received his master's in community nutrition at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and he performed his clinical internship at the prestigious Yale New Haven Hospital in New Haven. Most importantly, and we might be biased, he is the author of Culture and Health, an Introduction for Future Health Professionals, published by GRL. In this work, Zach prepares healthcare students to provide culturally sensitive, holistic care by fostering open communication with patients across cultures.
Well, thank you for joining us. I'd like to start kind of at the beginning. You have a really interesting background working in clinical settings, community settings across the country. What inspired that academic journey for you?
So I think that a big part of anybody in the medical field is either they're interested in the stability of the medical field, or they're interested in the medical field because they have had some kind of personal experience, whether themselves or loved ones that they know that have gone through things. And similarly, I witnessed how nutrition and like small things that people can do can impact their health outcomes. And as I was going through my schooling and realizing that, health behaviors makes out like those outcomes are going to matter, I recognize too that the education portion of it is a big player. Oftentimes people look at nutrition and they're just like, just tell me what to eat, or just write up a diet plan for me. Or, and if I could just like have somebody stock my fridge, then I would be better off. And I recognize that it's not just about what they have in their fridge, but like the mentality that they bring to the table is going to make a big difference. And so that's where I kind of slid into academia, is that I knew I liked to teach. I knew I liked to connect with people. And then as I went out and did like my clinical rotations for my dietetic internship, I recognized that it can be a real battle to get people to continue to come back. And oftentimes that continued education and those multiple touch points are what's needed to help people. And so I wanted to kind of work in the preventative realm rather than just say, okay, well, now you've been diagnosed and let's work with you. I wanted to try and find a way to help people prior to being diagnosed, how to ask questions, and prior to be diagnosed, how do you create life habits that are going to benefit you in the long run? So as a teacher, you kind of have a captive audience.
As part of your background, you've lived in quite a few different areas in the United States. Have you noticed a difference in the region and the local culture and how that also impacts these patient perspectives on nutrition and their own health?
Yeah, it is different. Everywhere is different. But the funny thing is that everywhere has a lot of similarities. So like I've lived in North Carolina, I've lived in Oklahoma, Arkansas, Missouri, I've lived in New England, both Massachusetts and Connecticut. And now I live in Arizona. And there was a stop in Florida as well. And every place has their own practices, their own cultures and beliefs around what health should look like. And living in Florida, everybody would go to the beach and they're like, oh, well, where I lived in Florida, people would go to the beach and they're like, this is here for my mental health. And this is here for my grounding and helping me settle in. In the diet there is different than the diet in Arizona and the diet in New England. And so while there's differences that occur, there's similarities in terms of like everybody is trying to be healthy, but the way they might define health is going to change. And so like in New England, you know what a snow rake is. but in Arizona, you know what a haboob is. And each of those things is going to be different. And like you have heat advisory warnings in Arizona, but in New England, you have winter weather warnings. And so whether you're going outside during those times or how you're going outside is going to depend on where you live. But there's a culture to it as well. And I think the bigger part to me is not Arizona versus Connecticut, but it's in Connecticut, I lived in a city. In Arizona, I live in a suburb. In Massachusetts, I lived kind of in a rural setting. And in Florida, I lived in a fairly big city that has different values and expectations. And so both Florida and Arizona have an older population, whereas where I lived in Massachusetts and Connecticut had younger populations. And North Carolina was more family centric, right? And so each of those places is going to have different needs medically, and it's going to have different expectations because of what the culture of either those ages, those ethnicities are all going to need. So every place is different. And I mean, we could talk about it more.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's too broad or too far out there.
No, yeah, I think that's great. And I'd be curious at what some of those overarching similarities are that you mentioned.
Yeah, so the internet.
Okay, yeah.
So there's this thing that gives people access to information anywhere. And the reality is that everybody wants to change. Everybody wants to say they want to change, and they want to feel guilty about not being healthier, however they define health. And so people are always looking for, how do I feel younger? How do I look fitter? How do I feel fitter? And how can I best like prepare myself in terms of foods to age better? And one of the things that I would talk about with my students all the time is that the fountain of youth in the past was some place. It was a location where, and they found it was in St. Augustine, and the water does not taste great, but supposedly it's there, right? But then now the approach more so is clean eating, organic, potentially keto, depending on who you're talking to. It could be vegan, and it could be the antioxidants, depending on how granular you want to get with it. And so your approach to health oftentimes is tied to like not wanting to get old and pass away. And so people chase it in different ways, but everybody's trying to either maintain their health or prevent their health from declining.
I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about how you teach your students how to look at these different cultures and explore the different cultures to help them relate to different types of people.
Yeah, good question. So a lot of it, out of the gate, you need to understand who you are and what your experiences have been. And so by establishing that self-awareness, you start to see what your culture is and what your expectations are and what your bias might be. Like, do you think that people from certain ethnicities are more or less likely to come into the doctor? And why do you think that? And does that impact what you're willing to do to treat people? So by understanding who you are, where you're from, what your experiences have been, that helps you to understand what your expectations are whenever you work with different individuals. And just the other day, I was telling a story. I call these kitchen table moments, where it's like, we're going to have a personal conversation where you can go back and forth and have a respectful conversation and make space for other people to share things that maybe aren't your experience or your perspective, but you can still respect it. And so I shared a moment where growing up, I'm in the middle of 5 kids, and my dad had labeled himself as the best pancake maker in the world. And one of the ways that he would do this is that whenever the bubbles would appear in the pancake batter in the pan, one of the kids would smack the pan to pop the bubbles. And it wasn't until I was in college smacking the pan while I was making pancakes that one of my roommates was like, "Why are you smacking that pancake?" I was like, "What do you mean? That's how you make pancakes. You have to pop the bubbles." And they were like, "No, there's a little bit of pushback. You don't have to pop the bubbles to make the pancakes." And so I called my dad and I was like, "Why did you make me smack the pan?" he was like, you were there. Like, I had to have you do something, right? And so, and I tell that just kind of as an anecdote to let them know that we all have experiences and stories that we just think are normal until we get outside of our own normal to then really explore what other people have. And like in other examples, I'll have the students talk about the foods that they eat, and they're like, "Well, I just eat what everybody eats. I eat quiche." I'm like, "Wait, who?" And everybody in class, I'm like, "Okay, how many of y'all eat quiche?" And maybe 3 people out of 60 will raise their hand. And then other people like, how many of you know what quiche is? And then a couple more will be like, I've heard of it, right? But to that person, they're just normal. So to help them become aware of other cultures, like I help them reflect on who they are and what their experiences are so that they can recognize what they expect. And then I have them think about like, well, when did you go to a friend's house and they had a different experience in their home than you had in your home? Whether that's the parental dynamic, whether that's the kids swearing in front of their parents, whether that's how they eat their food or what kinds of foods they eat, like where is it different? And so like I start to help them open up to the different cultures that they've experienced in preparation to really like stepping into knowing that every culture has their own health tie and health history and health like experience with the healthcare system. Because once you start looking at that history with the healthcare system, you start to see that there was a lot of bias, like institutional bias and systemic prejudice that occurred that causes people to pass down behaviors and beliefs to say like, well, we don't go to providers or they don't care about people like us, right? And to then help you understand that it's not just people don't want to go to a doctor. It's maybe culturally, historically, they haven't been treated well, or they haven't had access to insurance, or even if they have access to insurance, they don't have access to transportation to get to other people, or maybe they've come from other countries and there are language barriers that prevent them from getting care, and so they use the emergency room as their primary care.
That calls to mind the Tuskegee experiments and the treatment of historical figures like Henrietta Lacks.
Yeah.
But even more basic things, like if your first experience in a hospital was your parent or your sibling or your grandparent was in there for an extended period of time and then ended up passing away, then you're probably just already going to have a little bit of, anxiety going to a hospital or doctor setting.
Have you ever been in the hospital yourself? Have you ever been to see anyone? Or is it just kind of like, well, my grandmother went there and she died. And so that's what I think happens at hospitals is they die. There's certain cultures, the same thing happens with diabetes, right? Where they're like, once you start insulin, then that means you lose your legs. Because to them, like they may not have access to healthcare. And as a result, or they may not have access to insurance and preventative measures. And so as a result, by the time they get diagnosed, it's further enough along that they have the complications that come along with uncontrolled diabetes. And so all they see is the connection of you have insulin and now you don't have, like you have amputations. And as a result, those two things are connected.
That kind of is a good response to my next question, which was, have you seen or experienced instances where the provider wasn't able to breach kind of this cultural impasse and maybe did something that prevented someone from getting the health care that they needed?
There's times where you will see patients in the hospitals that cannot advocate for themselves or do not know how to advocate for themselves. Or don't know that they should advocate for themselves because they think that they just go to the doctor and the doctor fixes them. Because their expectations of the medical field is that they're going to do everything that they should, and they know everything that they need to know about you, rather than knowing that it's a two-way street. And that's changing culturally, where now people recognize they're a part of their medical team, like they are the expert on themselves. They may not know medically what's going on, but they know how they're feeling, how those things have changed, whether or not their wounds are healing as quickly as they used to, whether they're sleeping as well as they used to. But unless they communicate those things, the provider doesn't know.
Mm-hmm.
And I can share a personal experience. I had a patient come in and they requested nutrition education with a new type 2 diabetes diagnosis. And I went in there to do the education with them. And as I'm sitting with them, I'm like, well, what questions do you have? I've kind of gone through the spiel of what we need to cover. And his response was, I'm homeless. So where am I going to put this insulin that can't get too hot or
Mm-hmm.
else it's not going to work, or it can't get too cold? So like, how do I regulate that?
Mm-hmm.
And to me as a provider, that was just a reminder of like, I need to ask you. Like, I can't just come in and tell you what you need to do, because it's a concern of like, how do I take care of my insulin is different than how do I know how much insulin to take, or how do I measure the amount of carbohydrates that are in this food item, right?
Mm-hmm.
So asking those questions is a big part of it, and that's what I try and teach my students, is that it's you are treating people, you are not treating a diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
Right. What are some specific things that you teach your students on the process of getting to that information? You know, when they first meet the patient, should they be asking certain questions first, or, you know, what questions should they be asking to sort of get at that background so that they can understand the whole situation before they dive in, or maybe there's a different approach?
Yeah, and I guess like I should give a little background on the structure of the courses that I teach and
Mm-hmm.
the text that I wrote for Great River Learning,
Yeah,
is
sure.
that it discusses the culture of both the healthcare system that students are going to be going into, the culture of health professions. So whether you're a dietitian or an esthetician, or you're a dermatologist, or you're a surgical provider, what it is that you are going to be doing in the context of the group that you're going to be working with. Because if you're a pediatrician, your approach is going to be different than if you're working with cancer patients, right?
Right.
And so those needs and the culture of that profession are going to be different.
Sure.
And so I want my students to understand that it's not just a matter of like, what is your culture, but what is the culture that you are going to be stepping into? Because you asked the question of what questions do you ask, or how do you prepare students to really look at the culture of the person they're working with? And if you look at the system, right, like you fill out a questionnaire whenever you go in to talk to somebody.
Sure.
And in that questionnaire, it asks your medical history, it asks your family's medical history, it asks like if you have any religious beliefs that might prevent you from, or it just says, do you have religious beliefs depending on where you're going? And are there any like aversions that you might have to certain foods or allergies, right? And so those are blanket ways to get a fair amount of information. One of the difficulties that we run into is then we as providers go through like the Rolodex in our head of, this is what this person's diagnosis is, this is their family history, these are their symptoms, so this is what they need to do. And while like we have to do that in terms of understanding the time frame that we're working with an individual, you kind of have to tailor and target your information so that you can best help them. You also have to say like, okay, so I've gone through and I've done this analysis, I've gone through my own little algorithm in my head to say this is what this patient needs, but I need to step back and sit down with this person and say, what do you think you need, and what are your expectations for treatment? Because if they're expecting to come in and be like, oh, well, I've been a lot, like my heart's been racing a lot more recently, I'm not sleeping as well as I used to, and you come in and you say, let's put you on medication because you have anxiety. And you're like, well, I don't think that's what I have. And I've never heard that. And the only people that I've ever heard of having anxiety, I'm not like those people, right? But pulling back and asking them as a part of the treatment plan, like, what do you think is going on? And you're not asking them to be the provider, but you're asking them so that you can better understand what their expectations are, what their thoughts are, where they're at. And so that way you can have that conversation with them. And the whole time you have in your mind, like where you think things are going, but you're not forcing them down a certain path, right? But you're allowing them to say where they're at, and you can then work with them to make a treatment plan that they're willing to follow, rather than prescribing medications where there may be people that are like, I don't want to do medication. I want to
Mm-hmm.
try the natural way. And you're like, okay, if you want to try the natural way, these are some other options we can give you. These are other ways that we can go. But if you come in and you, again, the culture of the profession, if you come in and you know more than everybody and they need to listen to you because you're better than them and you
Mm-hmm.
have that ego about you, then you're going to miss opportunities to really connect with the patient to allow them to heal and to be a part of their plan of being better.
Yeah, you're really sort of teaching them the building blocks of being empathetic, empathetic humans, which when you're busy, you forget to stop and think about some of those things sometimes. So this is a good, again, like introduction to self-awareness and thinking about what other people might be thinking.
Yeah. And one of the things in my class is like tell them, I'm like, guys, it's easy right now to look from the outside and say what they're doing wrong because you're not in it yet, right?
Right.
But it's important to remember that most people have gone through the process to then get into that culture. So once you're in that culture, how do you change it?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you like stay you while still being a professional rather than just becoming, I'm a doctor now. And so now that I'm a doctor, this is what doctors do. It's I, Michelle, or I,
Mm-hmm.
Michaela, am a doctor, and I bring
Right.
myself to this. And so it's the way that I tell my students is I'm like, you're really good at being in other people's relationships. You're really good at telling them that their spouse shouldn't talk to them that way, or their boyfriend or girlfriend should like really care for them or show them that they care in different ways. But maybe in your relationship, it's a little bit different
Mm-hmm.
because when it's you, it's not as easy to like pull back and look at it that way.
Right. So throughout your career, you've researched a lot and written a lot about the influence of faith and spirituality on health outcomes, and we've also mentioned that now, faith as part of a culture. Can you share more about what interested you in the intersection between health and faith?
Yeah, and so part of it is that I grew up in a very faith-based household. And
Mm-hmm.
so faith kind of drove a lot of things. And I was surrounded by other individuals who faith kind of dictated what their beliefs were about either their health outcomes or the reasoning behind why their health was the way that it was.
Mm-hmm.
And really, I saw it as an avenue to connect with individuals. Because whenever you're trying to cross culturally communicate, you want to communicate in a way that people understand. And so I felt like if I could communicate in a way to those within a faith realm in the language that they understand, either using stories that they utilize or jargon that they're used to,
Mm-hmm.
and applying it to health principles, then that would help them to start to recognize, oh, so I do that here and I do it here. Or the lesson that I learned here can be directly applied over
Mm-hmm.
here. And so that's what drew me to it, is that we are all trying to connect to information, and it's easy to put things in boxes and
Mm-hmm.
say like, well, this is what I learned at school, this is what I learned at work, this is what I learned at home, and they're all different. But if you can draw those lines to connect things and say like, what you're learning about your health is similar to what you were learning about your faith, or if you can view your health through the lens of what your faith can look like, then that can change things.
I like that. And it's almost like, I mean, you're giving students basically a toolbox, metaphorically, of all of these different tools that they can use to connect with someone on different cultural levels. And faith is just one of those tools in the toolbox that they could use to relate to someone.
What I try to do is get people to have conversations,
Yeah.
because
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about how you all grew up, but talking about faith and politics and finances, like those are, you just like, those are no-goes. They're not
Mm-hmm.
on the table. But as a provider, if you don't talk about what an individual's faith is, you can really miss out on what they believe happened. Like, do they think that they're sick because they're fated to get sick? Do they think that
Right.
they're sick because they did something wrong and this is a punishment? Do they think that they're sick and there's nothing they can do about it because it's just the plan, right? And it's inescapable. And whenever I talk about faith, it's not just religion, it can be spirituality too.
Right.
So like you have to look at it in all avenues. But then if you also don't talk about finances in healthcare, then you really miss out on the fact that some people really are like hard pressed to come in and see a provider.
Yeah.
And then you tell them they need to go to a specialist, and that's another $80 or that's another $200. And then beyond that, they have to run a test that's $2,000 and isn't covered by their insurance. Like if we don't acknowledge that, then we're not really paying attention to what they need or what they are willing and able to do.
This has been a good summarization of the consequences of not doing this in-depth learning for the people, for your reputation as a professional, but really for those that would not be able to get the help they need if those considerations weren't made.
Yeah. And earlier, Michaela, you asked like what steps should somebody go through to better connect with a person? And to me, it's you talk with them.
Yeah.
You ask them questions and you listen. And a lot of times when you think about culture, you think cultural awareness, so like you know who you are, and then cultural competency, meaning that you know about other cultures. But there's no way to know every other culture. And there's no way to connect with every single culture, right? Where you're like, oh, I know every language that's spoken in the world. If you come into my office, I will speak to you in that language. Or, oh, I know that today is the 14th and this is a special day within blank, blank, blank religions, right? You can't know all of those things. So the real approach is cultural humility to say, like, I don't know every culture, but I want to work with you the best that I can. So I need you to help me. And by allowing somebody to come into your office or your hospital and say like, hey, look, I'm here to help you. But in order for me to best help you, I need you to help me too. So like, we're in this together. And whenever you help somebody feel like we're in this together, not just you come in and you say, here's your pills, take them, and then come back and see me in 6 months, right? That there's no connection there. There's no humanization there. And so connecting with those people by sitting down or removing barriers, whether it's like if you're in their office and you're just looking at your computer and they're over there, you're not making contact, you're not talking to them, or you're not giving them more than 2 minutes, like that, you need to connect.
All of this comes to what you just called that space that we all live in, the body. And so in some of your previous work, you focused on some questions about that each of us should reflect on when it comes to our body. Like, how can I show appreciation for my body? What has it done for me today? What inspired questions like that? And how do you translate those questions internally across these cultural barriers?
So I'm a dietitian by training, and a lot of the approach that I use with food is by helping people to establish peace with their person and peace with their plate. Because a lot of the fixes, quote unquote, fixes that are out there in the nutrition and wellness realm are more so focused on how do I help you lose weight and how do I get you to the real you, right? Like, how do I get you to the real you that's hidden inside of the bigger body you inhabit? And whenever we promote that messaging, then it really is a detriment to everyone because you're never enough. You're never good enough. And to go back to the religious conversation, there can be undertones, and not just religion, but culture in general, where your body is the enemy. Whether that is like your mortal appetites for wanting to connect to other individuals, or whether that is like overeating and glutton, right? Like your body and the appetites of your body is the problem. And you are a problem because you are imperfect or incomplete. And so in having this conversation, it's a big conversation to say you as an individual are enough. But there's a big push within the past decade or so for health at every size. And the concept is basically that you should be healthy at whatever size you operate within, right? Not to be healthy to lose weight, but to do healthier things, period. And if you have weight loss because you adopt healthier behaviors, okay, great. Like if that's what you're looking for, great. But if your sole reason for doing healthier things is to get rid of or change the body that you have, what mentality does that promote? How does that impact your approach to who you are? And we use the same, it's the same conversation whenever people look at plastic surgery. Like once you start plastic surgery, at what point do you stop? At what point are you enough? At what point do you say like, okay, so I got the Brazilian butt lift, but like there's also like I might need a nose job too to really like round out my perfect self. So rather than chasing those things, I would rather people establish who they are and be comfortable with who they are so that they're not trying to prove anything to anyone. And I will just say the pushback on this is that sometimes people feel like this is promoting obesity or promoting unhealthy lifestyles.
Sure.
But the pushback is I'm promoting health. I'm not promoting a certain body type.
Right.
Because you can diet all you want, and sometimes your body will not change the way that you think it should. You can diet, and guess what? You're not going to get taller. You can diet, and guess what? Your eyebrow lines might be in the same spot that they were, right? You can take vitamins and mineral supplements, and it might not change like how much plasticity you have in your skin. It's like you as an individual are enough, and teaching people that is a very like meta thing to go through.
Sure.
But once you change that mental approach, then the physical behaviors will follow.
And teaching that for themselves will help them have that open mind when applying it to the people that they're working with too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's the whole approach, is that if I can teach my students this, then they can carry that through and help other people recognize that it's not just about weight, it's about behaviors. And if your behaviors are healthy, guess what? You're healthier than you would have been if you didn't do those things.
You know, what do you see as the most consistent and evidence-based guidelines for people to follow for this health and happiness?
So the evidence talks about eating more plants. And that doesn't mean just going strictly vegetarian or vegan, but it means just eat more plants.
Yeah.
And the other research looks at physical activity that is sustainable. And so diet and physical activity that is sustainable. Because you can go on a crash diet or a fad diet and you might lose weight, but if you can't sustain it, you're going to gain the weight back, which then perpetuates the cycle of like, well, I know to lose weight, I really just got to cut out blank, right? I can never eat blank again. And that is like, maybe that could work for you. But if you're not balanced in your approach and you've lost weight, but you hate your life and you don't want to get out of bed, are you healthier? You might look thinner, but are you healthier? And so making it sustainable is really the biggest thing. So finding something that you enjoy and you will continue to do, whether that's the foods that you make because you like to make things at home, and you're like, you know what, I really love cooking, so I'm going to experiment in new recipes that are going to be something that I can keep up. Or whether it's finding physical activities that you enjoy, that you will maintain. So you don't have to go do an exercise that's going to make you jump over like giant logs and crawl under barbed wire. If you don't think that that's something that you like and you want to keep doing. Or you don't have to go to the gym if that's not how you value health. Maybe you like kayaking. Maybe you like going on walks with your family, or like taking your dog out, right? Like all of those things can promote a healthy existence, but they might not be the brand of health that's being promoted by society, because you have to go harder, you have to go faster, you have to be more cut, you have to have more muscles, right? And that's why in my book I talk about health brands, because the brand of health that somebody identifies with is going to dictate their definitions of health.
Definitely. And I think that, you know, links back to when we mentioned just the treating the whole person, you know, holistic health, both physical and mental, as you mentioned, that, you know, you might be healthy physically, But if you're not happy, then, it's not necessarily sustainable, and it's, not really is it worth it in the long run? Well, we have one more, our final question for you. This is a segment of the podcast we always do at the end of every interview. We ask the final question. It's called You're Wrong. Not you, but maybe our listeners and us. And so this is your opportunity to kind of set the record straight on any misconception or misunderstanding that people have in your field.
I guess like the tongue-in-cheek answer would be you're right that you're wrong.
Okay.
Can you elaborate?
Yeah, because like there are, and I'm thinking strictly from the nutrition aspect of this, is that there is a lot that will be promoted and marketed to individuals. And developing the skills to think critically and ask questions about what this information is important. And so if somebody tells you like this is backed by a study, say like how many people were in the study? When was this study published? Is it from like 1880 or is it from 2020, right? Is it during the pandemic? Is it not during the pandemic? When it says that like, okay, so this would be the perfect example. Have you heard of veggie straws? Have you heard of like veggie snacks?
Yeah.
Okay. So one of my favorite things is like, I will show students the ingredient list of those snacks. And the first ingredient for a lot of them is potato starch. So those veggie snacks are potato chips. But they might be baked, right? So they're like baked Lay's. They're like baked chips rather than fried chips. And so I say that, but then I also will say, but if you expand that, that means that every potato chip is a veggie chip.
Right.
But it's marketed a certain way.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So if you will take the time to like step back and think critically about the information and then be willing to not just like go with the flow of everything, then you might be more apt to see how, like I'm going to say like the term is loaded, but like you're being manipulated, you're being guided, you're being influenced one way or another to do certain things. Can I bring it back like full
absolutely.
circle?
Yeah.
We would love that.
So in the dietetic world, it is predominantly white individuals and predominantly female. And there's a lot of conversation about how culturally food recommendations may have been whitewashed. And what that means is that people will look at food recommendations and they're like, I don't want to have a kale salad. That's not like my cultural traditional food, right? But there's been a lot of conversation and expansion on what healthy foods are outside of just like, oh, well, you need to have your certain amount of servings of dairy and you need to have this many whole grains. And this is what a whole grain is. And don't eat white rice. And if you say don't eat white rice, there are certain cultures that are being excluded and they're almost being shamed for consuming that. Whereas they may be consuming fiber and whole grains in other ways, right? So it's being more accepting that other cultures aren't right or other cultures aren't wrong. They just are. And working within that culture, you can help them to adapt healthy behaviors. So, for example, there's powwow sweat. Within the Native community, they will use the concept that is used in powwow settings, and that physical movement that's involved with all those, they've used that to then build in physical activity, right? And they're trying to get back to more traditional ways of cooking foods rather than what colonizers had brought in and recommended and provided for them to consume. Similarly, there are more Latino dietitians that are out there that are promoting more use of traditional foods that are plant-based, right? That they're already consuming, that culture is already consuming. But whenever you take it into context of like, well, the recommendations are that you shouldn't do this and blank, 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 blank. rather than looking what they're doing wrong, let's look at what people are doing right and build on those things.
Thank you very much I think this has been a really good conversation, and we really appreciate your time. Is there any other questions or thoughts that we should share before we let you off? Yeah.
No, this is perfect. Thank you guys so much for allowing me to be here, for facilitating this conversation, and for us demonstrating listening and talking is what is part of the conversation. That's how we make changes, is by allowing people space.
What do people want? They want to be healthy. They want to maintain that health, and they want their bodies to work in ways that bring them happiness. Like Zach told us, that all starts with making peace with the person and peace with the plate, with knowing yourself so that you can practice the cultural humility to help others. It ends with those in need receiving the best care so they can reach and drink from their personal fountain of youth.
Zach, I love that your approach to teaching students to become more empathetic humans starts with the self and their own self-awareness. All of the approaches that we discussed to understanding a patient or even just another human are akin to tools in the toolbox of communication. And once you can communicate and understand others on a more personal level, you're really able to help them in a way that's not possible with just surface level interactions. These are all great reminders for everyone, medical and non-medical professionals. So I hope that all of you, our listeners, will stop the next time that you're having a conversation with someone and be a bit more intentional and purposeful with your interaction. Thanks for tuning in to Can I Get a Retake, a podcast by Great River Learning. If you liked the episode, show your support by subscribing, sharing, and leaving a review on your favorite podcast platform. For detailed show notes and transcripts, visit greatriverlearning.com.
Can I Get a Retake is brought to you by hosts Michaela Elby and Michelle Vanneman, with editing by Maggie Christensen. Artwork for the podcast is crafted by myself, and our intro music is courtesy of Comma Media. We'll be back soon with another captivating chat with a top GRL innovator.